All right. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm seeing lots of people joining on this call. Just so that you all know, I'm sure you got the notification. This is a recorded webinar. That is because we like to share it at the end to make sure that people who can't attend are able to see it. And then we're going to be sharing the webinar in a blog post at the beginning of next week with some of the resources that we talk about and link to in the chat. So we're just going to give a couple minutes for people to join. It's a really big crowd that will be joining us. We have about 35 people registered. We also have people joining from our Facebook Live as well. And so for that reason, we have you all on mute, but there will be a Q&A towards the end of this webinar that I encourage you to unmute yourself for if you have questions. And so we're just gonna, I think, Jess, I would say like maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. I'm no longer able to see the waiting room, which I don't know why that is.
Oh, I'm keeping an eye on the waiting room, so not to worry at all.
Okay, you got it. All right. I'll just keep an eye on the space that we are in then. And then the other thing I should point out early on, we do have some of our panelists are on the move. We have a great group of activists and organizers and community members that have joined us today for this conversation with busy schedules. So 2 of our panelists are going to be in more mobile situations, and we're just all going to be flexible if we have any sound issues or any kind of if we lose our speakers for a minute or 2. And then just since it is 12:35, I imagine people will keep joining us, but we do have our introduction. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. Welcome everyone to our first Fair Housing Friday of the month. This is the first in a series of Fair Housing Fridays that the Fair Housing Project of Champlain Valley of Economic Opportunity, otherwise known as CVOEO, is hosting. So we have one happening next week at the same time around mobile home parks and the opportunities and challenges that those communities offer to our affordable housing landscape. And then we have one for our final Friday of the month, talking about or looking at housing development and what other tools we can use to ensure housing equity. And I'm trying to remember, Jess, do I spotlight myself, or is this kind of a good way for people to be viewing our speakers?
Yes, I'll see if I can figure out a way to spotlight you to spotlight the speakers as they come up.
And so I'll just introduce myself since I'm already now talking. I'm Corinne. I work for CVOEO's Fair Housing Project. I do education outreach, and Jess is also joining me from the Fair Housing Project to be our tech support person. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to give us a Fair Housing Month overview. So we're joined by Carol, and Carol is the Northgate Community Engagement Coordinator. Now I'm like probably saying not quite the right.
Community builder.
Community builder, yes. Thank you for joining us, Carol. We have Nate Besio, who does peer support coordination at Vermont Center for Independent Living and a great advocate for disabilities right here in Vermont. We have Bhagawat, who is our one of our CVOEO community ambassadors. Thank you for joining us, Bhagawat, or Watt. And then we have Deac, who is joining us from the road as well. So Deac is one of our panelists who are going to be flexible about if we can't hear her. And she is the the director of Winooski Housing Authority and also on the Winooski Housing Commission board. So has a lot of great insight to our topic today, which is why aren't we building the housing we need? A look at how our housing stock that we have available is either meeting the needs of our community members, in what ways it's not meeting the needs of our community members. And so just to give you a quick Fair Housing Month overview and Fair Housing overview, we are the Fair Housing Project. We are a statewide program that works to protect and expand the housing rights of everyone who experiences discrimination and exclusion. And as part of that mission, we coordinate thriving communities, a statewide collaboration to raise awareness about the economic and social benefits of affordable housing. And then each April, which is the month that we're currently in, we celebrate the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968, signed on April 11th, which is also my birthday. So I'll never forget, which put essential protections into federal law, making it illegal to discriminate or in rental, sale, or financing of housing based on race, color, national origin, sex, family status, or disability. Vermont actually has additional protections too, which I'm gonna name so that we normalize knowing who is protected under the Fair Housing Act here in Vermont. In Vermont, age is protected, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, receipt of public assistance, denial of development based on income of prospective residents, and most recently, victims of abuse, sexual assault, or stalking. What that means is that it's against the law for you to be treated unfairly because of membership in any of the protected or federal protected or state protected classes. And discrimination is not always obvious. It can take many forms. It may happen when a landlord refuses to rent to you or tells you an apartment is unavailable when it is vacant, or when you have different terms or conditions of your lease than other tenants that the landlords rent into. Just to say that it's complicated, the Fair Housing Project is here to help navigate that with you. And we do a much more extensive overview of fair housing if you're ever interested to dig deeper. This session is being recorded, as I mentioned. We do have a generous space for Q&A at the end. And then basically the way we're gonna set up this webinar is that I'll introduce our panelists. They're each gonna speak to their own perspective on housing, on how it either is meeting the needs or not meeting the needs of the community that they work with or represent. And then we're gonna have a nice long Q&A at the end. Jess, am I missing anything or did I cover it all? Great. So I actually, Bagawa, I know that you have a short window of time that you're with us. Bagawa is one of our community ambassadors. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to what you're seeing in the community in terms of housing availability for folks who are new Americans, or barriers that folks that are new Americans might be facing when they're looking for housing in our area.
Is that my turn to say something? What I have a challenge to work in the community, you mean?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So the new American, according to my understanding, the people from my country, the first challenge is the language. Language is always challenge for the people who are coming overseas from my country to living in here. And sometimes they are not able to express their thoughts, their problems because of the language. So that's the most important that I know in my community. And the other things, they are not, the language is the first thing, and then the second importance, they are not able to find the resources where and how they can reach out. So those are the main problems that I'm seeing in the community. For that, to resolve that, every other week, we have a short conversation with the community peoples, but it is not that solution comes as their need, meaning so there are lots of communities need services. So everyone wants to go through, but it takes time to get the service. So they have to wait. One thing, and other things, sometimes they are feeling shy to express their problem too, because of the language. So the most important things to my community that I face is the language, and I am making some notes, and I want to share with the CVOEO our Shipario, so that we can maybe do the awareness program, or for the taking ESL class, to at least they can speak out, they can able to speak out their problem, and then go from there. So that's my future plan.
Thanks so much for sharing that perspective, Bhagawat. And
Sure.
This is actually a great transition to Deac, because something that we do at CVOEO is lead tenants' rights translated classes, and we were invited into the Winooski community, I want to say a month or so ago, and did a translated class where the participants came and expressed similar concerns, where they're saying this language barrier makes it challenging to communicate with my landlord. It makes it challenging to understand what my rights are as a tenant and what my responsibilities are. Like even small communication challenges, from like being fined for having one of the participants said, my neighbor's garbage flew into my yard, and the landlord had scheduled someone to come clip the grass, and they couldn't because of my neighbor's garbage, and I was fined for that person's time, and I didn't understand why. So it's something that does come up a lot, and it becomes a really significant challenge. And Deac, I know that in Winooski, some of the new American families are really struggling to find housing that supports or is big enough for their family. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that. And I know that you also have some other perspectives that you wanted to share with us today. Oh, I can see that you're talking, but you are muted.
Am I better now?
You are
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Loud and clear.
Oh, okay, good. Yes, let me take off on Bhagawatt a bit. It is something that we're working on hard, is not just bringing people in and having us sign a bunch of forms, but actually making that a 90-day process. I'm trying to work with USCRI and AALV to bring an orientation process together. I have an odd goal here, and my goal is to get yelled at by a family in their language, because certainly people who speak English don't hesitate to yell at me. So everybody should. I'm saying that in jest, but the point is it's not just language, because what comes behind the language is the power. And I would love to see us really learn to empower our whole community. And that's something I set out to want to do initially, and then we got into the pandemic. So I'm hoping when we get back home, we're launching some efforts there to really empower members of our community. I think to the second point, you're absolutely right. A lot of what's happening as we're building 1 bedroom and even 1 bedroom affordable condos, we're tearing down 3 and 4 bedroom old, what we used to refer to as demolition by neglect. Landlords buy property and just run them into the ground and then tear them down. But what's being built is 1 bedroom. So one of the things that we're working on is expanding 3+ bedrooms and looking at different models of how those bedrooms might work. Would a 3 bedroom with an in-law apartment, so you get 2 adjoining apartments, work? You know, those are the things we're exploring now, and we're anxious to reach out to our partners. We think right now we can add 11 units of all family, all on a bus route in Winooski, easily at our property. And we're looking at another property at St. Stephen's. So we're trying to figure out, what do we buy to support families? So that's 2. I think the third piece of fair housing that's getting to be a real challenge for us is, how do we deal with folks with mental health or substance abuse issues when they're in crisis? And that's the third and really difficult piece for us, because the only tool I have is eviction. And I literally have to evict people and make them homeless before they can get back into the system and have help. So my third idea for today, I'm sorry to dump all 3, but I think this is a really important one, is that there be a hub and spoke housing system where people can move back and forth from independent living when they're in crisis to get into a more supportive housing. And then when they're out of crisis, move back into independent, because the only way that really happens well at the moment is to evict someone, to make them homeless, to get them to a point where they can get housed, to get the treatment, and then go back to the end of the line. In the meantime, they're waiting forever once they're ready to get into an apartment. That's a challenge, because sometimes people won't take these folks. And they may have lost their subsidy. So my proposal here, that I'm working really hard with anybody who will listen, so thank you for listening, is some sort of hub and spoke where the subsidy can follow folks into a more supportive housing. And when they're ready to come back to independent living, they can. So the problem is, they get into independent living, they get in crisis, then they start refusing help. And that's where a whole lot of things go bad. And so in the fair housing, and how do we keep people housed rather than get them on the merry-go-round of homelessness, is how do we be more thoughtful about those points? So those are my 3 issues or comments.
And Deac, I have so many follow-up questions, but the one I'm going to stick with for now, and then I'll ask more during the Q&A if we don't lose you before then. How does it impact the Winooski community to have a limited amount of units available that can host families? So limited 3+ bedroom apartments.
So that's an interesting question, because, and there's kind of buried good news there in a weird way. Our taxes go up a lot. And the reason they go up a lot is the school has a lot of fixed costs. And when you lose 3-bedroom homes, you lose kids. And when you lose kids, not only is your school not a richer place, but there's fewer dollars following those kids into our school system. And when there's fewer dollars falling into the school system, the rest of us have to make up those dollars. So in a very tangible way, which is one of the arguments I want to make, is, you need kids for a vibrant community. But if you're not willing to listen to that part of it, just basically for your tax base. The other thing is, we send people off the bus lines. When we don't have places in Winooski and Burlington and some parts of Essex, how do you work if your only affordable place is Jeffersonville or Huntington? So you're just creating a poverty situation that won't go away until and unless we provide housing for folks on a bus line. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, we could talk about that piece alone for the whole Zoom webinar. And I did mean to say, like, we will not cover all housing issues in this one space. That's why I really encourage you to, if you can, to join future fair housing conversations. But part of the reason I was asking about that piece is I know that we had a situation where earlier in the year it made news where there was a 24 unit apartment that was potentially undergoing renovations, and there's concerns in the community that the families living there wouldn't have access to housing to move into. So basically the concern was that the families, the children would have to leave the city of Winooski and then, find housing, and then they have to relocate schools. And we know that can be really disruptive for young people. And there's so much that we could go into there, but I'm going to pivot and ask Nate, Nate Besio from VCIL, one of the pieces of the Fair Housing Act that I really like to promote is that the disability protected class affords folks that fall into that the choice to make reasonable modifications or reasonable accommodations to their units to make it more accessible. And the hope around that is that folks that have mobility needs have equal access to rental housing as those without. And so I wonder, Nate, if you can speak to how effective that right is under the Fair Housing Act, and just generally what challenges that renters might face, especially in Vermont, and especially during this significant housing shortage, who fall into that disability protected class.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. That's a pretty broad topic. When you talk about this, when you talk about disabilities, it's a really broad category, right? So I'm going to be focusing on physical disabilities right now, but a lot of times accommodations don't have to do with physical disabilities. They have to do with mental, developmental. Some of that discussion pertaining language also pertains to the deaf of hard of hearing with sign language. So there's a lot of stuff to cover when it comes to disabilities, but right now I want to focus on the physical aspect. And I think when it comes to reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications, it can be effective if, both parties are willing to cooperate and work with each other, and there is a good due process. I think from my experience, and the thing is that we always tell people that we work with, we're not housing experts, but probably the vast majority of the people we work with are in need of housing. And so the biggest issue first that we run into is that, according to fair housing and ADA standards, new buildings being built really only have to provide one unit for every 5 units, and then a certain percentage that need to be accessible. So there are a very limited number of really accessible apartments. And then with that being said, they can be modified, but how much can they be modified? We're hearing mentioning of multifamily homes for people. A lot of times somebody with a mobile disability or mobility disability oftentimes needs someone to live with them to help them do their daily activities, whether it's getting up in the morning, cooking their food. And for that, that's difficult because they can only get a 1-bedroom. And so they're stuck on a wait list as well, trying to find, somebody to live with in addition to making physical modifications to the place. So those are some challenges that in terms of spacing with like everybody else, a lot of times they have equipment that they need to bring where a 1-bedroom apartment might not be enough. The other thing that could be a challenge is that, for depending on the unit, unless that unit is federally funded inside or subsidized, the person moving in, if they need to make modifications, has to cover the modifications themselves. So they have to pay for the modifications themselves. So somebody comes in and says, come into a place that's not a federally funded ADA unit, and says, I want to put in a rolling shower, I need this. Well, they may have to pay for those modifications themselves. And then when they move out, the landlord could say, well, you need to change it back. So you have some people who are not in a good financial place. They have to struggle to find the funding for that. And then there's the time putting in the accommodation request. Again, accommodation request doesn't mean you ask for something and say, boom, you get it. It also says the landlord can't say, no, I don't want to do that. It's a negotiation process. That has to go back and forth, back and forth. So that can take a while. So it really, I think in spirit, it's good. I think it's very good that more housing is being built that do provide accessible units. But again, when you think about truly accessible units, many places just meet the minimum standards of accessible housing, which is a certain number of units. And I think really going towards more of a universal design when building these places that can be adapted very easily is much way to go. But as people explained also that, a lot of times the units are too small. Finding funding for making the changes inside the unit is an issue. And another issue is people with mobility disabilities often can't drive themselves. So they have to live in a more urban area because living outside that area is an issue. So it's a number of issues like that. I hope that answered your questions, but I'm happy to answer anything else.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll have more questions for the Q&A. And again, we do a whole training just on reasonable accommodations and modifications. There's no way to fully go into the complexities of this issue in our 1 hour that we have together. But I appreciate the perspective that you bring, and I just want to thinking about still this translated workshop I helped teach a couple of months ago here in Winooski. One of the things that came up was multiple people, in this landscape right now, we have, as we all are well aware, a really significant housing shortage. We also are in a state with one of the oldest housing stocks in the country. And so folks that are, there's more people competing for fewer units, and folks are making decisions that might not be the safest or the healthiest decision just to get housed. So we have multiple people in that workshop I referenced earlier say, I can't get in and out of my unit unassisted, which is a huge barrier to safety. If someone has an emergency, if they need to get to a hospital, if they need to get to their family, or if they need to evacuate their unit, that should absolutely be something that they can do. And so I just wanted to kind of put in that anecdote as well. Thanks, Nate. And then Carol, so I asked you to join us too, because a lot of the things that we're focusing on is kind of the lack, the barriers that are existing. And Northgate, I want to say, continues to be our largest affordable housing community in the state of Vermont. And it's a really unique community. So I think it just would be nice if you could speak to the history of Northgate and what makes Northgate a unique affordable housing community here in Vermont.
Of course, I'll be very happy to do that. And Northgate, I'm going to give you the story of Northgate, hopefully in a nutshell, but also hopefully that you can understand and appreciate how Northgate came to be. So back in 1969, Burlington was facing an incredible housing crunch, probably very much like what we are experiencing now. And the city decided that it needed to build more housing. So Northgate was created by Fairfield Corporation, builders from Connecticut. The interesting thing is that these builders got a 1% mortgage for 20 years. 1%. They think about that. And if they paid their 1% mortgage off in 20 years, they got to do whatever they wanted to do with the property. So that meant that they could tear it down, displace all of the people that live there, 336 families, and put up luxury condos. And hopefully you don't lose me, because I just got something that said my internet is unstable. So at the end of 20 years, that's exactly what Fairfield tried to do. Now, we had this mayor called Bernie Sanders at the time. And when the residents went to Bernie to say, we are about to lose our housing, Bernie said, over my dead body. And so the rest is, he told CEDO at the time, which Brenda Torpy was part of that, to help the Northgate residents to organize. And that is exactly what happened. The residents basically bought out the Northgate property with the help of a bunch of agencies, Vermont Housing and VHFA, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. It was almost as if all the stars were aligned and we had all this help. So the residents actually became the owners and operators, along with a bunch of other entities as a partnership, to own and operate Northgate. Now, they didn't think all these big agencies were really a little afraid of letting the residents control Northgate 100%. But that's exactly what happened when all of our mortgages at the time were paid off, and the residents at Northgate became the owners through a board of directors, of which we have 13 people. The majority, which is 9, are Northgate residents. We have 4 community directors, but I will tell you, not one decision happens at Northgate that the board of directors don't approve. And that really is I think the best way to do affordable and sustainable housing in Vermont. We are multi-income. For the folks that need more help, we're able to place into our operating budget food pantries with the help of the Vermont Food Bank. But resident owned and operated, when you get your residents or organized, which is what is happening with our mobile home parks right now, there's much more of an investment, and people want to preserve their housing. And so many people around the country say, why aren't there more Northgates? Well, it really takes cooperation on a local, state, and federal level. And I think that depending on who is on the federal level and who's on the state level, there can be a few more hills to climb. So anyway, that's basically the history of Northgate, resident owned and operated, affordable, multi-income family, and it works. And I will also say diverse, because we have 22 countries that are represented here at Northgate. So I'll sign off here for now and wait for questions and answers if there are any.
And Carol, before you mute yourself, I'm just wondering, like, when I was new to affordable housing and I was thinking about, okay, imagine what affordable housing looks like, I might have imagined a place like Decarreau Towers, which is an affordable housing complex, and it's high density, like 11-story, I want to say, building, which provides much needed housing to a lot of community members. Can you just quickly describe the kind of layout or the geography, if you may, of Northgate?
Of course. So we're very fortunate to be on the shores of Lake Champlain. Northgate is on 32 acres of land here. We have, I think, 52 buildings. So our 2 and 3 bedrooms are like townhouses. They have full basements. They're not finished. Some people do choose to finish them, but we have basements, a first floor and a second floor. The 3 bedrooms have 1 bathroom and a half. And then we have 1 bedroom units where we have a building of 4 1 bedrooms. The board and the residents feel very strongly about curb appeal. We want our housing to be safe and affordable, but we also want our residents to feel proud of it. We want our residents to feel pride in living here, and to feel like they're not being warehoused, but they have homes. And most of our residents feel very strongly that it's not just being housed, it's having a home. And to really drive that point home, we've had residents here that have been here from 1969. So they've lived here for 53 years. They've had multiple generations grow up here. For instance, I've been here for 29 years. I live here, I work here, I raised my son here, and he also now lives here. And so we have multi-generations that do live here. It's a beautiful community, and we keep our maintenance department very, very busy because it's imperative that this not only be a place for safe and affordable housing, but a place where you can feed your soul as well. We feel very strongly about folks who might be food insecure, that they're not food insecure. People who are artists, we want to hear them, and we want to see their work and hear their voices. So Northgate not only is a beautiful place to live, but we believe a very holistic place for body, mind, and soul as well.
Thanks for adding that extra piece, Carol. And we are transitioning to our Q&A portion. If you are unfamiliar with the Zoom raise hand feature, I want to say, I thought I knew where it was.
Just click on your little window, I think, right?
So if you go to the bottom of your window, there's a reactions button. It has like a smiley face emoji. If you click that, you should be able to raise your hand. And if you don't raise your hand, but you do a wave or a thumbs up, we're going to assume you're trying to raise your hands and go ahead and call on you. Also, feel free to put your questions in the chat if that feels more comfortable for you, and we'll read it out loud. And I just wanted to add a little anecdote. Carol, I was asking about the format of Northgate, not to presume that a townhouse is more preferable than a high density build situation. But I do think it's just really important to highlight that affordable housing can look a lot of different ways, and it's important to have a lot of different options. I did work with a resident who had 2 children and lived, I want to say, in like Williston, and was appreciative of that housing situation, but was really nervous to have the kids kind of near the highway. It was a really busy road, and kids love to play. They love to be outside. If you have like just a few inches of green space, the kids are going to be in that grass playing there. So I remember when I connected this resident to Northgate, there was a wait list. They waited and they did get in, and I saw them. I used to do the Northgate different events for the community. I would do portraits, like hand-drawn portraits of the residents, and I saw them there. And she said, I am so happy my kids can play in the yard and walk over to the park, and I'm not worried about traffic. And so just to say that I think a both and situations really important, and I just wanted to highlight that unique aspect of Northgate before we open up the conversation to Q&A. At this point in time, I'm wondering if any of our participants is ready to ask a question. I can't remember. I just switched to gallery.
So Corinne, as we wait for our participants to form their questions, and I'd really encourage everyone to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you. I have a question.
Just before, I did see that we paused the recording. Are we doing that so people feel comfortable asking questions about that piece being recorded, or?
It is still being recorded as far as I can tell.
Oh, if it says recording on your end, then I'm not going to worry about it.
It is, yeah. And it's also streaming live on Facebook, and that will be recorded as well.
Okay, and so if you are nervous about asking a question when this is recorded, feel free again to put your question in the chat. You can privately put that question to Jess or I, and we're happy to read it anonymously. I just like to give those options out there in case I know that Zoom webinars can feel a little bit like a performance in that way. Ask your question, Jess.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much, Bhagawat and Nate and Carol and Deac. One thing I was thinking about, so as I'm listening to what you're saying about the needs for language access and for more multi-bedroom units and looking at different models for how we structure supported and independent living, the need for universal design and how that's connected to our needs for transportation and access to housing, and then also the Northgate co-op model and thinking about the community that's built in housing. I would really love to hear from any and all of you, what needs to change, either at a local level or a state level, to make more of these things happen. Is it funding? Is it permitting? Is it zoning? Is it public will? What needs to change?
I'd like to just kind of pop in here. There's unfortunately a very big misconception about what affordable housing is. So many people think affordable housing means, I'm sorry, but a ghetto or a slum. And having spoken in Washington, D.C. at the Low Income Housing Coalition, my question to them was, has anybody ever refinanced a mortgage? And if you have, then you are a proponent of affordable housing for yourself because you want a better rate, you want a lower payment. Affordable housing doesn't mean anything except that you live within your means. And there shouldn't be any landlords who give I'm having a senior moment, but housing that isn't safe and that isn't affordable, and that simply warehouses someone, and they're getting rich off of their renters. So one thing that the Northgate residents learned in becoming owners of their own property is that when you own a property, you get this amazing fund that you can put like a certain percentage of money as a landlord into this fund, and you can buy anything you want with it, boats and so on and so forth. And of course, Northgate's not doing that. They're saving that fund for helping their residents meet ends. But there's just such a very bad association of what affordable housing means. And truly, I think that we as the professionals need to get that changed. We have to change people's perception of affordable housing doesn't mean anything except that it is affordable. People can live within their means. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Carol. Nate.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what Carol's saying. I definitely think to get rid of this preconceived notion that people who live in affordable housings are, going to trash the place and not take care of the place. And, I think there's this big notion that, if somebody has a voucher, then they're going to come in and they're going to just not take care of the place. They're going to throw things everywhere. That's, I've definitely worked with a lot of people who are on vouchers getting affordable housing, and they take great care of their place. But a lot of times they have issues finding it because, maybe landlords are unwilling, even though it's illegal, to accept those vouchers, or unwilling to do that because they have this preconceived notion of that. So I definitely think that's part of the issue. I think we're just simply, we have for a long time, Vermont, and especially the Burlington area, has lived in a place with an ongoing housing crunch where there's just not enough housing. The landlords, the owners have all the power. They can charge what they want. And again, the ability to bring in accessible housing, it's just not a priority to them because they can't make money that way. So how do you do that? Yeah, you have more funding. Yeah, build more accessible housing. Make sure there are more regulations in place to make sure that landlords are taking care of the property, making sure that they are following regulations, make sure that they are, making sure these housings are being improved. The majority of work I do is helping people get on wait lists to get vouchers to move into properties. And when they're told it takes, 1 or 2 years just to get one of these federal vouchers, their heart sinks. And, part of the job is finding them housing until then. And then you have to help somebody who gets a voucher find accessible housing, which is then, even more difficult to find. So, yeah, definitely more housing. How we get that, you're seeing some of that start up now. There's more housing areas popping up. But again, that takes time. So, but I also think that there also needs to be more training. Again, it goes with this preconceived notion that people move in, they're not going to be able to take care of the place. And a lot of times they don't know how, they don't have the physical abilities. So there has to be some housing supports in place to help them with that activity, and making sure the activities is there. So I guess that's my feedback on that question.
Thank you so much, Nate.
And I do see that Deac has something to add too. And I will say quickly, Deac, I'm going to put a link in our chat to the Vermont Housing Database that does allow you to search affordable housing based on specific needs. But again, it's usually places that have long wait lists. But I just want to put that resource in there. All right, Deac, it's Mike's to you.
Okay, I'm going to try. I might be breaking up because I'm chasing a satellite here. I think it's all and above. It's all the way from zoning to transportation And focusing just on housing is vital because it's the vital link between all of them. But we've got to understand that there's a link between all of those pieces. I think we're at an inflection point. I think as a community, we're at one of those points where we need to ask different questions of different people, engage different conversations, and everybody be willing to learn. I think that's one of my biggest advantages in being new is I'm just learning every day. And I think we all need to, because we're at that point where I don't think it's clear and I don't think there's a roadmap. And that can be a huge opportunity if we can figure out how to rethink our old notions of, yes, people, don't take care of it if they have a voucher. That's not true. We also, from vouchers right now, we're issuing vouchers. Less than 30% of the people who get a voucher can find housing and end up losing their place on the waiting list. I mean, there's just a humongous issue. But if I had to settle it down to two things that are crunch on the policy geeky side, from the policy geeky wonk me, it's transportation access and zoning that allows you to build more density near public transportation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Deac. And we will be talking about zoning in our final Fair Housing Friday. That's, of course, one of the major pressure points when it comes to housing development. And I actually think it leads into this question we got from the audience. So I'm going to read this out loud, and then if the panelists can answer at whoever feels comfortable starting. All right, so the question is, what is the rest of the state missing? The role model in Burlington area is admirable. What does the rest of the state communities need to do? And I will say that part of the reason why Burlington in particular does have a lot of affordable housing is because we have inclusionary zoning in Burlington, which means that 15% of developments over 3 units, I want to say, have to be affordable. And just go ahead and correct me if I was wrong about that. And there are inclusionary zoning policies in some areas in Vermont, but it's not a widely used tool. And Carol, I see that you just unmuted if you wanted to respond.
Sure, and that inclusionary zoning actually happened in response to when Northgate was created, believe it or not. I think that a lot of the rest of the state has a lot of second homes to out of staters, which I'm not sure, but perhaps their town councils, city councils might be more focused on as well. But I will say that Vermont is the only state also that has not only the one agency that takes care of housing preservation and land preservation, and that was because of Madeline Kunin. She created that one agency, so these two, housing and land, aren't working against each other, but in tandem with each other. And I think that if the rest of the state kind of zones in on that, there might be more success in talking about housing preservation that is affordable. But to Deac's point too, transportation is an absolute must.
Yeah, and that's come up a few times. So this question of, we do talk a lot about Burlington area and Winooski and sometimes even Montpelier and South Burlington. These are areas that do have transportation. So we both Nate and Deac have mentioned multiple times the bus line. I think that's a really big issue. Of course, there are other infrastructure questions when we think about smaller municipalities that we don't have the time to get into. today, but we will be talking about to some extent at the end of in our final Fair Housing Friday of the month. And then Nate, Nate or Deac, I wanted to give you both the opportunity to respond to that question. What can communities outside of Burlington be doing to address the affordable housing shortage?
Well, I can touch the plate. So a lot of times, actually, and again, this goes back to the transportation. Some of the more rural communities, I think it was Deac or somebody mentioned, like Jeffersonville and Richmond and Underhill and Jericho. There's actually some affordable housing there. That's actually some places where we may be able to get people out. But again, the issue comes out, okay, well, I moved there, but how can I get to my doctor's appointments? How can I get to my things? And then, you have SSTA, and you have Medicaid transportation, you have certain transportations, but they are few and far between. So again, we keep on coming to transportation, but if we're going to expand the radius of which we'll have people move, in addition to providing more accessible housing, it just needs to be the transportation issues. Because when you're looking at, providing more space to provide some of those larger bedroom places, you might look to places where there's more land and more space, so that's in the more rural areas. But the problem then comes of how do people, get to their jobs? How do people get to their appointments from there? And that is a conundrum that a lot of times the people I work with really need to balance. So again, I don't want to keep bringing up the same topics, but transportation is an issue. And again, I just think it's Burlington has, and I think it's mentioned, has always had a very inclusive policies. Obviously, there's not perfect, but it's definitely more inclusive than some places. And you have municipalities with different budgets and different priorities, and you just need them to put more of a priority on housing. And like I said, I think with the exception of maybe Rutland and some of Montpelier, the Chittenden County area is really the only area that has a viable busing source that provides a bus line, and even in the Burlington area. So that is really one of the biggest issues I see, because for my perspective, the affordable places and the longer space for places are in those areas. It's just the difficulty of people being able to get back and forth to do the things, be able to live daily. That would be my feedback on that.
And if I could just real quick, I mean, the alternative to that is to create ability to create jobs in more rural areas. So, when you, and I think that has to be part of the solution too, is how do we have economic development in those areas so that there's jobs there, so that transportation becomes less of an issue.
Yeah, I can't tell you. I think that's a huge topic right now as people are facing displacement from the Chittenden County area, the longer and longer commute times that people are having to get to work. Of course, with the rising prices of gas, it's another significant burden that we're putting on our renter communities. And I do see that we are at time. And again, I cannot stress enough, there's not enough time to really go into all of these points that we've covered. Please keep coming to our Fair Housing Friday discussions, bringing your questions to us. Thank you so much to Nate, Carol, Deac, Bhagawat, who did have to leave early, for bringing your experience to the table. And I do want to send a big thank you to our sponsors. We have many that have helped fund both the Fair Housing Fridays, helped host the events across Vermont for Fair Housing Month. Really a big thank you to the work that you are all doing and the funding that you're providing to help us do this really important work. And then again, we have to keep having these conversations. It's complex. It's not an easy issue. And so please check out our Fair Housing Month activities. You can go to fairhousingmonthbt.org. We have a bunch of events happening across Vermont. We do have some in-person events happening as well. And libraries have curriculum available across Vermont too around Fair Housing Month. And we really just have to normalize having these complex conversations about housing and bringing it to our community so that we can engage on the same page without the kind of jargon that can get in the way when we're talking about our housing needs. So with that, I'll say thank you. Thank you all for coming. And thank you to our panelists. I give you a big round of applause, and I just enjoy being in conversation with you all.